With Metro by T-Mobile, your hard-earned money goes further. This tax season, there's 0 fees to switch. Enjoy Metro's lowest price, just $25 a line for 4 lines. Plus, get 4 free Samsung Galaxy phones when you switch. Now that's the best deal in wireless. Metro by T-Mobile, empowering you to rule your day. All lines lose promo rate if any deactivates. No fees on select phones. Limit 1 per line with eligible port. Excludes sales tax. Limited time offer. Additional terms apply. See metrobytmobile.com.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to discuss the free agency offensive line positions here. Now, we put these all together because we know the Ravens need interior offensive line help, or at least that's been what everybody's been saying for the last several months since the season ended. And we know they might need tackle help, depending on whether or not they trade Orlando Brown. But even if they didn't, they really were playing without a net, without a backup tackle last season, not a good one anyway. And it's something the Ravens need to try and figure out, we think, as well. So Jordan Kough is here to join me. Jordan, always a pleasure to talk football with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ken. I think the offensive line is an interesting bunch as we head into this, offseason and this free agency. They are certainly a lightning rod, I think, amongst Ravens fans right now.
Yeah, if it weren't that the skill position players are what everybody wants to talk about, and everybody wants to talk about wide receiver on Twitter, of course, the offensive line is one of those parking puzzles almost, because you have a lot of players who could play different positions, and you don't know whether, Phillips is going to be a tackle or a guard. I think he'll probably end up a guard, but you don't know for sure where the Ravens plan to use him in this next year. You don't know if DJ Fluker might still be around as a backup at tackle. You don't know if Bozeman is going to be a guard or center, but they have a lot of moving parts. Bredesen, his position has not been determined. Could Matt Skura be back and a plug-in player for 1 year as a backup? Who knows? But anyway, how do you view their current players? How do you see the pieces right now? And remembering, of course, that we're going to talk about the free agent offensive line in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big question. You named 4 or 5 guys right there. You've got Tristan Colon-Castillo on top of that. You've got Patrick McCarry on top of that. And you've got Ben Powers on top of that. And when you look at the draft capital that the Ravens have put into this position, you're seeing 3rd and 4th rounders regularly being spent by the Ravens on these positions. And maybe for another team that's meaningless. But I think the Ravens really put a lot of stock and value in guys that they find in those 3rd and 4th rounds, and in particular on the offensive line. The Ravens really like to kind of snipe at the players that they like. And, maybe they've been sniping more because they don't love the guys they've already got on the roster. But, Tyree Phillips, as an example, is a guy that seems really physically talented. They like him as a guy that can pull still, even though he's a guy that could swing out to tackle. You don't see that terribly often. That makes him a really great fit from a guard perspective, but at times was explosively terrible this past season. I mean, Tyree Phillips was, in at least a couple different wins, I think could have been the guy that you pinned the loss on when it was all said and done, because he blew plays where the Ravens actually ran passing schemes that were open and they never had a chance to hit on those. And you can't do that, and that's not fair to Tyree Phillips. But he had these explosively negative plays that were explosively bad. And so, everybody wants to talk about the wide receiver position, and everyone, that's what fantasy football is, why everybody wants to talk about that. But when you really get in the mud, I think for Ravens fans that are watching closely, if the offensive line plays exceptionally well, this is a team that's going to be borderline impossible to beat, in my opinion. And so in that sense, all these chess pieces that they've got in-house, as well as kind of whatever move they decide they want to make in free agency, I think on the offensive line is the most critical decision this team's going to make this offseason.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in a lot of ways, they could pay a lot for a wide receiver and not get that much value out of it. It'd be very difficult for them to not get full value if they really found a gem on the offensive line, whether that's in free agency or internally with one of the guys they have. It would be a big find and a big move forward.
Yeah.
All right. Well, a couple of things before we go into free agency, I always like to remind people of is, one of the things I look at is the option value of a player over several years. And so a player that you have for either 2 or 3 more years, what the Ravens have with several of their interior linemen, McCary, TCC, Bredesen, for example, Phillips, you can buy into that component, years 2, 3, and 4 of a player's growth, or you can buy into ages, we'll say 32, 33, 34, or 33, 34, 35, which often is very much the opposite direction in terms of growth and your chance to maintain an injury-free season. I just see that as being a precept that the Ravens continually are very clever about, and they don't generally sign an older player. That said, they went out and they got Matt Burke and ended up being a great move for them for 4 years.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be the right guy that fits into the right position along the offensive line. I think that if the Ravens are going to, if I was going to give an overview of what I want to see from a guard, I mentioned this when we had our podcast about Lamar Jackson. Brandon Scherff was the guy that I would have gone all in on. Mm-hmm. And that's because he's just fantastic pulling. I think he would have been a perfect fit in kind of like cementing the right guard position, but also letting the Ravens kind of do what they already do, mostly in one direction. Those counter pulls all were kind of coming from the same direction. I think there's a chance.
Hitter.
Yeah, I think next year with the right personnel, they could go both ways, especially if Orlando Brown Jr. is still on the team. I think Rodney Stanley is capable, certainly, of being a pull guy. So they could run it in both ways in all kinds of crazy iterations. You've got the right pulling guard in there that's athletic going both directions, and I think that could be really dynamic. And to me, I thought Scherff was the best pulling guard on the market.
Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunately it's not saying that much. So what I'd like to do here is let's start talking about these individual players, and you start with whoever you think are the top guys, and maybe we should just have some eliminations up front of guys that there's no way the Ravens can afford them. If you'd like to do that, but if you think that everybody's still in line and you wanted to go all in on Scherff, maybe we just talk about whoever you'd like in terms of the kind of the what do you call it? The efficient frontier of practicality between how good they are and how much they're going to cost.
Right. I mean, I think Joe Thuney and Corey Linsley are the two guys that kind of jump right off the page there that are going to get at least AAVs above 11 million, I think, or in the ballpark of that. Who knows? The salary market makes it a little bit hard to determine, but that's the big question, I think, for the Ravens. Are one of those two guys they love? And both of them, I think, are 29. So they, like you were just saying, they don't exist on kind of the young scale of things. And Thuney, just doesn't, to me, I wouldn't want to spend the money on him because I don't think he's a fit from that pulling scheme perspective. He doesn't add that dynamic. He's a guy that could swing out to tackle potentially if that's what you needed and you were worried about trading Orlando Brown Jr. But I just don't think he's going to be worth the squeeze there. And you've got to be worried anytime the Patriots have a shot to keep a guy that they think is super talented around when they have a ton of cap space and they choose absolutely not to do that. Just feels like there's some red flags there for me.
Well, I mean, they weren't going to franchise him because the franchise tag applies uniformly to all linemen, so they'd effectively be paying left tackle money for an offensive lineman who's a guard. So I guess I kind of understand that, and they must think they can re-sign him if they want to. I'd still say he's over 50% to return to New England, just because I think New England will use their money wisely, and it makes sense to sign an internal free agent, not give up a comp pick. Although, not sure exactly how the Patriots will look at that this year, given how much cap they have. My problem with Thuney is a little different. Even though he's one of the younger players available on the market, you really look down this group. I mean, it's 30 to 34-year-old guys who are out there and available, and Thuney's 29. Does it make sense? Excuse me. I thought he was a step below Linsley for sure, but really some of the other guys as well you could have for a similar dollar amount or less in terms of his actual ability. So that's where I like, he's a good player. There's no doubt about that. I didn't spend a lot of time watching him pull, not that the Patriots do it nearly as much as the Ravens do, but he's a step behind the other guys at that same age group. So I would take Linsley over Thuney of those two.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And I think that the Ravens, I mean, that's the other question, do the Ravens feel like they've got the center that they like on their roster? They've rotated a series of different guys through there. They've had Bozeman in there. Where is your kind of cost benefit analysis about what you're going to have to pay a guy like Linsley to come in there?
Let me ask you the theoretical question that goes there. Let's say you don't know if you have the right center on your team, but you have 5 guys. And I think that's the situation the Ravens are actually in right now. They probably have 5 potential guys who could play center for them this year. Do you take the chance on that and make a bet on your own coaching, your own ability to discriminate between the talent, your own ability to develop the right guy and identify him quickly enough that you get him the number of reps that he needs to take that step forward in year 2 or 3, whether that's McCary or Bozeman or TCC or even bringing back Matt Skura and plugging him for a year and then saying we're going to draft somebody and bringing somebody new. Or maybe it's Bredesen, getting his first chance at center. And you say, well, he's not working out with this arm length at guard. It's going to be more difficult for him. So we're going to try him at center and see if it works out. They have so many options. At what point do you say, we have so many options that I know we can make one of them work? We don't know what it is right now, but I think we can make one work.
I think that's what Eric DaCosta likes to do. If you look at how he approached inside linebacker a couple years ago, if you look at how they approach offensive line this year, they seem to like a diversity of choices, and they think that they can coach up or do what they need with those guys to get it done. So I'd say if I was looking at the history of how that worked out, or how he has approached it in the past, that's where his kind of investment's going to be. And usually I think I'd agree that, especially I think we saw a couple decent, at least half games from TCC when he was in there. Ben Powers played a good stretch, but then a bad stretch. I mean, you could see it there for a couple guys, but for me, the thing that I get stuck on is that, we don't know what this team is going to look like in 2022, 2023 and beyond. You don't know what's going to happen with Lamar. You've got him cheap for this year. Maybe you just need to cement down one of these positions right now, even if it's not going to be cap favorable. And even if you're going to regret it a little bit down the road, because your window to win, I think, is wide open, at least right now. If the offensive line, you take away the bad snaps from Skura and McCary alone, and that could have fundamentally changed the season last year too. Right. So I could get on board for a Lindsley signing that's significant. It wouldn't be my first choice, but I'm not going to be upset if that's where the Ravens kind of put their chips down. Right.
I've mellowed a little bit in the last few days on the signing of a quality free agent, because the Ravens, the way the NFL is talking about it right now, they're going to have mega deals from TV coming in. OTC is already projecting the cap to increase by about 20 or 25 million per year for the next 3 years, basically. If that's true, and you can obviously then create contracts which backload them, you're spending fewer dollars today, and it could really make sense. Now, you can't ignore the first-year contract cost of that player in 2021 cap dollars, which will remain the scarcity. The Ravens have some limited ability to move dollars around there. They can move some Peters dollars around, push them forward. In fact, they could just push them forward, a couple of years and then void them. In fact, if they wanted to, meaning they would have to accept them all in the year Peters is released. They've got ways to move some money around, but I think I'm more on board with making a move like that now. I just think I would sign an interior free agent before I do this, because the other thing about going out and getting Corey Lindsley is it's almost as if the guy has a restricted free agent tag and it's a 3rd round tender. You have to give up a 3rd round draft pick in order to sign him. If they want to sign Matt Judon, on the other hand, which I think we'd agree is a very key player the Ravens could get back. Maybe we wouldn't, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think I'd spend the money there first.
That's interesting. If there was anywhere that I didn't think the Ravens were going to spend big, I don't think it would be on Matt Judon. And I agree with you that I think he's really critical and plays a really important role in the way that Wink runs this defense right now. But I think he might. I mean, who knows? I don't think he burned the bridge, but I think that the whole thing that happened with Hensley is emblematic of the fact that he knows that he's not going to be here next year. That's kind of so if he does come back, it's going to be at a steep discount because the market wasn't there and he was in the game of musical chairs, the one that was left out. And I will gladly have him back if that's the case. But I didn't get the feeling that the problem that the Ravens had was outside linebacker last year. If there was somewhere I was going to give, we talked about this in the Jackson podcast as well. If we're talking about marginal rates of return, I think that there is a little more to give back on the defense than there is potentially on the offensive line. But outside linebacker is going to look like I know that's not the topic of this podcast, but that's going to be a real interesting way that it plays out too. But there's a big, that's the other question, right? Like, if the Ravens have a shot at signing a guy like Von Miller, I was like the outside linebacker from the Broncos, that's a legitimate shot that I think the Ravens should take. That is a quality investment that I think that they'll get every dollar of return on, and I would want to see that over the Ravens signing a guy like Lindsley or Tooney. Tooney, I don't really want to see them sign anyway, so I think that's irrelevant. But in that instance, you're looking at adding a ton of value, I think, in a spot where you weren't getting it in that same way. So I guess if the Ravens that's how I want the Ravens to pick. And so when I look at center a little bit, I look at last year and I say, okay, this was a little bit of a mess. At the same time, I'm a big Mascara fan, and I think he just got in his own head at some point over the course of last year. He was rushing to get back because he wanted to play. He knew it was a contract year for him. He knew it was an important year for him to play, so he pushed through probably what was not smart, but like a lot of pressure in a COVID world to get back to health to play. And I think that was that became part of what happened with the yips of the snaps and all of that. I thought he was quite good at center for the first half of last season or the prior season, before he got hurt. And I think a lot of fans would be upset if he was the guy that the Ravens tapped as a guy who they gave a chance to get back. But if they could get him back on the veteran minimum and they wanted to give him an opportunity, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But I think I'm in the minority.
No, I'm completely on board with that. I'd be all for that. I think, his Mascara's next attempt is going to be the best attempt you'll ever see from a player. He's not going to give up on the NFL. He's not going to give up on himself. He's not going to trash his career by doing something stupid. He's a smart guy. He's a dedicated guy. Whatever we got, he's going to leave it on the freaking field this next year. And that may not be enough. It's possible. But as a pure blocker, Mascara didn't have that bad a year last year. And if you look at PFF grades, they roll in the bad snaps into his blocking grades. So it obfuscates what's happening with him as a blocker. But I can tell you, scoring block by block through the season, it was a C year as a blocker. It wasn't that bad at all. And, you can live with that. And if they had that at center, if they had that at center the whole season, they'd have loved it this last year. But, I think, at the worst, Mascara gives you another year of basically Mascara 2018 to 20 blocking wise, which is not too bad. It doesn't win you the division, but it certainly doesn't lose you the division. Other services don't really value properly. I don't think the back end of double teams, which Skura is particularly good with. They don't really value footwork exceptionally well, which Skura is particularly good with. The Ravens have not had any problems with tripping the quarterback or tripping the puller, which happened a lot in previous eras. I'd be for that. And I personally, having talked to Matt on the phone, I've really appreciated who he is personally. I think there's a good chance that he'd be, we get the best that Mascara has at the very least.
Yeah. But the center position is an interesting one when you get a little bit beyond Lindsley, because I think that there are, a couple, I think Alex Mack is a guy that could be the Matt Burke potentially type guy. He had a pretty weak year last year. And I think a lot of people think that he's completely cooked, or he may have kind of regressed a little bit too much athletically, but the Falcons were a mess. And, offensively, the Falcons were just kind of a hot mess all across the board. And, if he's going to come here on a cheap deal as well, I like the veteran presence of a guy like that. I like a guy that might want to chase a ring with this team in a way that he hasn't been able to do with the Falcons for some number of years, and be able to kind of hang it up as a retiring Matt Burke type guy that I take a look at too.
Well, Burke, they signed for 4 years, and I think he might have been 32 when they signed him. Alex Mack just had a bad year at 35. And while he had never previously had a bad year to speak of, he's missed a few games with injuries and that, but he had never really had a bad year to speak of prior to that. That's a bad time to have a bad year if you want to keep playing. And I'm not into spending 6, 7, 8, 9 million on him. If it was a case of a 1 year highly incentivized deal where he makes $2 million and it can go up to $6 million, Okay, I'll consider that. But I think the market is going to value him higher than that. And that means the Ravens will probably be priced out. And they're more going to be attuned to the age risk component here than I think a lot of other teams will be.
You surprised me when you said he was 35. I did not think Alex Mack was that old. So
he's actually be 36 this year, I think in October or whenever it is. But that'll be his football age for this year, since he usually go by 12/31.
Yeah, that would probably put him off the list for me. Another guy that I thought was interesting was the center from Miami, Ted Karras, who again, not great, but I don't think is going to command a huge contract. And played really solid in the middle of the season for Miami, I thought, after a little bit of a weak start. So he's a guy that could come in and fill in, but. I think he's going to get stuck in that class of free agents. We're going to have this really weird thing, I think, that happens in free agency where all the money is going to get sucked up by these top guys really early on. Mm-hmm. You're going to see really kind of cheaper deals for like these middle level veterans, and whoever's left over is going to have to take really cheap deals when it's all said and done, because there just isn't going to be enough money left over or enough places to play. And I think he is not quite good enough to be in the upper tier. So that leaves him as potentially available kind of in that kind of $2-3 million range. And if that's the case, I think the Ravens should be interested.
Yeah, I think that's the right range. I think if it was $2 million, I'm in on a player like Karras. He's the kind of guy I need to look at and say, how much did he provide relative to what the Ravens have in house? And the one thing he did give is tremendous durability the last 2 years. 1 year in Miami, 1 year in New England. But he gives you some of that physicality. He's been a pretty good pass blocker, not really exceptional. He's been an okay run blocker in these years. That's probably something that can be tuned up. He's not a player I've watched for some of the other concerns out of a center. Is he going to get off balance on the back end of a double team, or is his footwork bad? That sort of thing. But he is a guy that was on my list. I have him as a bottom tier candidate. It sounds like you might have him as kind of the bottom of the mid tier, and not sure there's a lot of difference there. But he's one of the younger options at 28.
Yeah, that's what I had noticed when he had kind of appealed to me. So, I think the Ravens are going to go for age here anyway, just the way DaCosta does run things, that it's going to be, it's not going to be a guy like Alex Mack given his age.
Well, I mean, once you're at that point and you're Eric DaCosta, why don't you say, hey, we got a guy's 24, a guy's 25, a guy's got 26, and another guy's 23. Why the fuck aren't we giving these guys a chance rather than go to the open market?
Yep. I mean, I think that ultimately that's where it's going to look like it's going to shake out for this team. And, let's say that you bring a guy back like Matt Skura, and he plays a Ryan Jensen level year. Mm-hmm. That's a 3rd round pick for nothing.
It's probably a 4th or a 5th in his case, but yes, you're right. You could get a breakout year cheap and then get real value out of it. And it's a win-win on all the sides. Matt Skura would be going to a place where he knows he's going to get a fair shake on playing. And if he does play and plays well, he's going to get paid somewhere. So I think it would be a win all the way around the board. I'd love to see him get his career back on track. Let me bring up a couple other names. Gabe Jackson is a name that comes up. Durable, certainly a good interior pass blocker. Lots of mobility questions. It's a long time ago now that Gabe Jackson ran a 5.51.40 at the combine. There's a question of just how much ability he'd have to pull within this offense.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to see if the Ravens, where it kind of lands in that regard. But he was released, so there's no comp pick value that would be lost there. Mm-hmm. So we know the Ravens really like that. He is a really big boy. I mean, these guys are all huge, but he's a big boy. I see him as not a fit for the same reason, in the sense that I think that the Ravens are going to want a guy that can pull. But if they don't, I haven't looked at what Gabe Jackson's numbers look like from a pass blocking perspective, but I think the Ravens might be willing to trade really quality pass blocking for less quality run blocking. There were a few moments, I think, that in last year's games, they felt like they really, like when they needed to go to the well in terms of pass blocking, it wasn't there.
Okay, so you'd be trying to acquire the pass blocking. It wasn't clear from your statement before.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. There are things that Lamar makes all pass blocking easier is the other side of that coin that, you get a guy who's been a substandard pass blocker. All of a sudden he's a good pass blocker because he's got Lamar in the pocket to save him from a bunch of pressures. And that's been true at tackle on both sides for the Ravens. Both their guys have benefited tremendously from having Lamar there. And as a run blocker, Brown has benefited in terms of having an easier set of assignments. We've talked about that ad infinitum, so I don't need to go over it again. But I think there is an opportunity, but you look for a specific skill set that works well with Lamar, whatever they think that might be. Maybe it's making sure that the guy knows exactly how to play combination blocks well, has got good timing on those. Maybe that's not it. Maybe it's just mobility and we can teach him how to get his timing right on these combination blocks. It'd be interesting to see how the Ravens approach this. I tell you what, let's continue on with this, and we're kind of lagging on it because I just love talking theoretical football with you, Jordan. But who's your next guy on your list?
I think it would be David Andrews, the center from New England.
So obviously exciting in terms of the guy's got plenty of experience and has been a pretty good player within the Belichick offense, obviously, is only 29. Yep. So that's actually young for this group, which is ridiculous that there are no really young free agents there. Certainly could play center if that's where he's been. That's where he's played primarily with New England. Other thoughts on him?
Yeah, just a stable guy who's played pretty consistently. Not a lot of holds from what I was looking into him. He's gonna be one of your stable guys, and I think that there could be a chance that the Ravens just want some of that kind of like pretty middle of the road stability that can fit within a system, and is going to be a smart player, and that's kind of why he jumped off the page at me.
Okay, I think I'd be all for that. Let me bring up another name from the Ravens past. That's Rick Wagner. And obviously, the Ravens might need Rick Wagner at tackle. And I guess another consideration would be, could you ever use Rick Wagner at guard if that's where your emergency was? And I think in the Ravens case, they'd ideally have him as a backup tackle, but it almost gives you the flexibility to move on Brown because he could be a temporary solution as a starter at right tackle.
Yeah, I think, the Ravens are going to have to, maybe not have to. I think the Ravens are definitely going to bring in a couple veteran free agent swing tackle to like guard-ish kind of guys like they did with Fluker. And I think that Rick Wagner could very well be just as capable as any of the other types of those that they could bring in. Kelechi Osemele as another former Raven could be, a similar type of guy, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's on my list too. Wagner actually played very well last year. So, and I know a lot of that's playing with Rodgers is going to be easier too, just like playing with Jackson is. But he played about 3/4 of a season with Green Bay last year, looked good. And honestly, has really only had about one poor year as a pro. So a really good draft pick by the Ravens, good developmental project by this. He went off. It was sad he got hurt because he was having a big year with Detroit in the year that happened. I think that ended up costing the Ravens a round of draft pick in terms of the comp pick that happened. But, player I always liked, back pylon blocker means he really tries to use his length well to get the speed rusher around the edge of the pocket. Never had more trouble scoring pressures than with Rick Wagner, by the way, because it was always so close. It's always like the ball is diving for the corner of the end zone right there when you're trying to see, did he really get that guy by the back or did he impede the quarterback in some way? And I liked him as a player, and I'd be happy to have him back even at 32. How about Richie Incognito? 38 years old now, only played 2 games last year. But one thing you can say about Richie Incognito as whoever he is personally, and I don't even want to get into that, he's been a hell of a football player whenever he's been on the field.
Yeah, and I think you heard some Ravens fans chattering a little bit about the Ravens not kind of having that muscle or that kind of like that edge. There was all this love for Ryan Jensen and kind of his avid defense of Tom Brady, and this idea that at least in some places the Ravens didn't really seem to have a guy that was protecting Jackson with that same kind of mentality, and he could be one of those guys. I mean, I worry about a guy that's that old with the injury history that he's had. But, if he's willing to come in on the right deal and, especially as a backup, even if he brings that feistiness and that edge, I think that's something that could be well served for this Ravens team.
I mean, it's hard to believe that Richie Incognito has been around since 2006, but Part of the reason it's hard to believe is because he missed 2 entire seasons, 2018, 2014, didn't play a single snap either time. Last year, he only played 2 games, which is a concern. But he's been so good all the time. I mean, he's the kind of player that an NLTBE contract was made for, not likely to be earned bonuses, because you base that, I believe, on the previous year. So with 2 games, it's easy to structure something that says his quote unquote stats or his playing time has to increase, and then that becomes not likely to be earned and effectively pushes that forward as a cap cost until next year. I think from that perspective, he'd be an interesting signing. And there is a question as to whether or not, you want to sign a player like this before the compensatory period is over.
Yeah, definitely. I tend to think that given his background and the off-field stuff, I think could also just eliminate him from what the Ravens might want to do.
Yeah. Not unheard of. I'm going to bring up 3 other names that are top tier tackles, but they're looking for starting jobs, and I don't think any of them would come to the Ravens. Trent Williams, obviously going to earn one of the biggest contracts out there this year. Russell Okung, even though he's 34, is a player who's going to want a starting job wherever he goes. And Alejandro Villanueva at 33, unbelievably. He's only played 6 seasons, but he's 33, is a guy who's going to get good money and start somewhere with all the tackle problems in the league. In a lot of ways, Russell Okung or Alejandro Villanueva is your alternative to signing Orlando Brown. So let's look at that in a sense. If with Brown, you get a player who's 8 or 9 years younger than those guys. You're getting a period of ascension during his play, and you're getting a player who's probably approximately as good right now as either of those guys. And it's easy to understand now why people would want to toss a high 2nd round pick or maybe even a 1st round pick out there for Orlando Brown. And we'll see where that leads. But there's definitely potential value there when the other alternatives look like what they do.
Yeah, for sure. And especially in this market, and especially with kind of how things are going to shake out, it'll be interesting. They play it's interesting in the sense that it's a valuable enough position that it's possible that they both get snatched up and come off the board really quickly. And if that happens before anything happens with Orlando Brown, I think that will make it more difficult on 2 levels for the Ravens to trade him. One is the teams that he potentially would be going to have now locked up a tackle that they like, but 2, that the Ravens are just even less interested because they know how big of a gap they potentially could have by having another. I mean, that could be potentially all 3 spots on the right side of the offensive line that they feel like they have a little bit of a question mark about. And in addition to that, you got Stanley coming back off the injury. And from all we've heard, he'll be fine, but you never know, especially early in the season.
You make a great point there. So with those 3 top tackles, with Trent Williams, Okung, and Villanueva out there, and you would hope then that there is a very heavy elasticity in the market for price there, and basically all the teams are pushing back and saying, you know what, you're just not going to pay $13 million in this environment over 4 years for an older guy to come in and play left tackle for us when we have other options. And you'd hope people would say no all the way till the compensatory period is over. And then it might mean that you have an opportunity, at least during that time, probably before the draft, to trade Brown and get the best possible deal you can, because he's the only option out there who has any youth to him. That would make sense in terms of you're buying into an ascending player.
Yeah, definitely. And I love having a good conversation about any elasticity, or like even in this case, we've got some sticky wages, in that sense that they're not going to come down, right? Because you've got guys that, especially if it's their last contract. I mean, for a guy like Villanueva, he might be just willing to ride it out a little bit longer because, this is going to be the last contract shot he gets, or potentially could be. That if he doesn't play a great year this upcoming year, even in a better market next year, maybe there's nothing there. And so there's certainly that element that's added to it. And it seems like all the decisions are being kind of pushed back and delayed by everybody in all these teams as far as possible. And I mean, usually it's the case where we're seeing tags happen at the last possible minute, but it seems like this year, even more so than usual, it's kind of less known from a league perspective of who's going to get tagged and not compared to other years.
The tag deadline was today, right?
Or it was today. It was today if they don't extend it. Now, there were rumors that the NFL was talking about extending it. It seems like those died down, but it should have been today at 4:30, I believe.
Okay, so the NFLPA would have to agree, I assume, to an extension. So they'd have to be getting something in exchange, but probably get something worked out for what that would be. How about other guys out of either the bargain bin or the mid-tier level that you like?
There were other names that I saw that could potentially be interesting. I thought Mike Iupati played like a handful of decent games right in the middle of the season last year. James Carpenter is another guy that kind of has a little bit of that cachet and the history of, you're looking for, especially from our perspective at this point, it becomes much more about pedigree and what we've heard about some of these guys. So you get those kind of old free agent types that are holdovers from kind of prior eras that were really good then. And so, Iupati, if he had something left, obviously a fantastic pulling guard during his time in the prime with San Francisco, also knows Roman, would know some basics of this system and something in that regard. He could be a guy that, on that non-guaranteed contract is part of camp for the Ravens this upcoming year.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say no, certainly to him coming to camp with any kind of non-guaranteed money or even $25,000 in guaranteed. I wouldn't go higher than that, I don't think.
Yeah.
Another guy that comes to mind for me, Matt Feiler, in terms of being a AFC North guy. We've seen a little bit more of him, both at guard and tackle, I think, for the Steelers. And it'd be an interesting player if he could be a swing guy that I think might make sense for the Ravens. Now, he's not a great player by any stretch, and he's not a super young guy, but he's 29, and that represents kind of the youngest of the free agent group of linemen. It's hilarious to see. He's enormous. He's, a 6'6", 330 guy, so he's got that good length to play tackle if needed there. I guess the good question would be his feet if he moved outside. Based on what we've seen from him, I wouldn't rule him out. And he's one of the few guys that I think you might give a mid-dollar value to. And I'm talking maybe like 2 years, $7 million kind of thing. Something that's it's not 20 over 2 years, but it's also not the vet minimum. And there just aren't that many people who fall into that category for me.
Yeah, and another name I saw kind of doing a little research here was Jermaine Illuminor.
Yes.
And he's a guy who's super young, obviously from an athleticism perspective, really would fit in, I think, with this team. Also, still felt like he was learning football with the Ravens, which was part of the reason why he wasn't there. But, the Patriots aren't going to give up a draft pick for a guy that they don't think has talent. So I think that there could be some upside with him.
Yeah, I think he's, because of his youth, and he's by far the youngest free agent lineman out there of any note at age 27, by far the youngest. He might be a guy that gets signed during the early signing period. I don't know that he really deserves it, based on his level of play, but I think somebody will say, okay, that's a guy I'll take a shot on. And it may even be a team that is already in bad shape in the compensatory formula and says, okay, we signed this guy now. We take him off the market, and he's going to understand the value of getting his salary secured in a year like this.
Yeah, I mean, I could absolutely see that, and he's an interesting project. But I also wonder, a guy like Kelechi Osemele was a guy that I think the Ravens should have been in conversations with to instead of going to Kansas City last year. And it seems like in some instances, maybe some of these guys that leave in free agency or traded away or aren't on board may not want to come back. And that could be the case for a guy that was traded away like him.
It could be. I mean, it was honestly at the time, I thought this is an opportunity too good for the Ravens to have given up on. On the other side, once he was gone, it's like, wow, we could have had another backup tackle, and that would have been really nice this last year. So it was just they had too many linemen at the time, and they really kind of had to make a move. That the Patriots picked one they really liked out of the group, and they got 2 decent years out of him.
Yeah. I mean, for me, there weren't a whole lot of other guys that jumped off the page of me, but any for you, Ken?
Only one other that I'll mention, and it's only because I've seen him on a recent episode of one of these home improvement shows. I forget which one it was, but he was buying his parents improvement to their house. It's Kelvin Beecham, who had played with the Jaguars for a while, been a hell of a pass blocker for most of his career. Actually, he only played 1 year in Jacksonville, Pittsburgh, Jacksonville, the Jets, and Arizona in his career. He played almost 700 snaps last year and still looked pretty good. I would think as a backup tackle, he would make a lot of sense to somebody. He is 32 years old, or will be in June. It's a risk, but he's a guy, I think, if he could be had cheap, would be a guy I'd be really interested in at tackle.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. The Ravens definitely need one more swing tackle type. And, we haven't talked about, I guess technically Andre Smith is under contract. So it'll be interesting to see if they feel like he's the guy that can fill that role.
Yeah, I don't know where his guaranteed, non-guaranteed money is too, because they signed him for something like $25,000 at guaranteed money. So does he have to still earn that guaranteed money by showing up to camp this year to try and, give it the effort? I mean, we all assume he's retired, of course.
Yeah,
but it'd be interesting to see if he could be back.
Yeah, I was surprised when the Ravens had signed him in the first place, and I don't think we'll see Fluker back either. But the Ravens are going to have to. They definitely need something more competent or something they feel more trustworthy of, I think, as at that backup tackle position, as one that they can stick with and they're ready for at the beginning of the year. So I do think it's going to be interesting to watch that market of what they try and do to kind of fill that spot, because I don't think it's on the roster right now.
Okay. I'm not 100% that Fluker is not going to be back. He would be my dark horse to return. I think, he could give you backup value. I thought even as a blocker, most of he had a number of F games in terms of his grading, but most of those were in lower snap games. So when you weight by snaps, his grade came out to be about a D+. Not great. He's 30 years old. That's not even that old for the offensive linemen that are available. I thought there might be enough there from his play at tackle, where he's clearly playing out of position at this point, that you could project some value at guard where he might really be able to fill in there usefully for you, given the length he brings and some of that mauling ability. So I'm a little more positive on Fluker, I think, than everybody else, but I think he's definitely a guy who fits the Ravens system and probably nobody else's at this point. So they could have him cheap if they wanted him.
Yeah, it's just the Ravens have released some very odd cues about what they think about Fluker then, because their unwillingness to even let him start the entirety of a game during certain stretches where it seemed like it would have been really valuable for him to be able to do so, especially as Tyree Phillips seemed like the game was just moving too quickly for him. So you've got a veteran that you like enough, and you're still not willing to hand him the keys for the entirety of a game. I guess that's the thing I'm looking at and saying, okay, that's why I don't think the Ravens are going to bring Fluker back.
Yeah, I mean, it's at right tackle. And, that's where he was out of place. But Phillips was also out of place.
Yeah.
Playing tackle in the NFL. Neither one of them is capable of using their size really effectively to get the guy to the back pylon like Wagner is or like Orlando Brown is. And it really brought up a shortage that the Ravens had. I think it was more of a statement to me that they're saying neither of these guys is good enough. That's number one. Or number two is, we're not just going to take Phillips' position away from him and not let him have a half a position when Fluker hasn't earned the position at right tackle either, which is more like what you're saying, I think, that it's not a great endorsement of Fluker in the process. That said, either one of them, it wouldn't surprise me if neither one of them is really the answer at tackle, but one of them ends up being an answer at guard for the Ravens.
Yeah, Tyree Phillips, I think, probably is the biggest wild card that the Ravens need to make a decision about how they evaluate him, because we saw it on his rushing attempt. He is physical and he is strong and he's quick. He carries. You can see, at least in some of those moments, why the Ravens were willing to spend the draft pick on him. But at times, just looks totally lost. Looks completely unable to use those skills to be successful. And so maybe they can work with him for this offseason. They feel like he takes their strides moving forward. I mean, I don't know how you evaluate that in COVID and, all of kind of everything that's happened. You got to trust your instincts about how well these players grow in your system, how much stronger or, how much better they get in those things. And the Ravens are going to know that better than anyone. And in that sense, I think I'm willing to give the Ravens I won't be terribly upset if they roll the dice and they bring this whole crew of offensive line back and say, we're going to go with, Macari and Cologne at center. We're going to keep Bozeman at guard. We're going to let
Powers is our guy.
Yeah, Powers and Phillips fight it out at right guard, and whoever wins these competitions, those are the guys we're going to go with, and we're going to push them as hard as we can in camp. To everybody's going to have a shot at a competitive spot somewhere, and maybe let Macari be the swing tackle guy if he loses the spot, or regardless, he wasn't awful out there, but he probably wouldn't be my go-to.
Yeah, I don't think it would hold up over a full season, but yeah, it is an interesting option. Now, I thought one of the really, really jet black horse options for the Ravens was Isaiah Thomas. I don't have that right. Wilson, yeah. Isaiah Wilson, yeah, of the Titans. Unfortunately, he got signed, or not signed, but acquired by the Dolphins today in an odd exchange of 7th-round draft picks. So it's one of these weird things where essentially they're giving him away for nothing, but he has $4.6 million of guaranteed money over 3 years on his contract. Doesn't seem like a lot, certainly in terms of getting a veteran. It is not. Miami rolling the dice a little bit and honestly playing a little bit of power with their cap to make that move. Not a lot, because it's not a big high dollar move, but it's something that there's a pang in my stomach that says Isaiah Wilson might still be decent, and the Ravens just missed out on an opportunity to get someone that they could have corrected.
Yeah, what the Dolphins moved up like one pick, I think, right?
There's an exchange of 1 year too, so I think
there's a year.
They give up. Okay. No, they acquire the pick in 2022 and they give up the pick in 2021.
Okay, I thought it was both for this upcoming year, so that would have meant they both lost in anyway.
That would be a real statement to Wilson. It'd be even more of a statement to Wilson if they're willing to move down one level. It's similar story to kind of a guy like Richie Incognito, right? Like, or just some of these guys that it just seems like can't get his head on straight. So, I don't know if the Ravens want to deal with something like that in a year like this upcoming one, or one where they feel like they have something like that going for them. But I agree with you. Talent is what the Ravens need at offensive line. And I still think that it's the best place where the Ravens can make the biggest progress on this upcoming year, in terms of overall value return of what they're going to get. Maybe outside linebacker, depending on what ends up happening there. But I think Bowser, I think they're going to re-sign Bowser, and I think he's going to be a lot better suited to fill Judon's role pretty quickly if they kind of let him have the keys to the car. In that sense, that makes me worry less about that. Okay. All right, that'll still only be 2. I guess I'll be less concerned when McPhee is also in-house, which I think he will be.
I do too.
And unfortunately, I don't know if you saw the tweet from Jihad Ward today, but Jihad Ward said something. It was a fairly cryptic tweet, but it said it's almost that time, and we're 8 days away from free agency here. We're recording this on the 9th of March. That doesn't make me feel good. That's a guy who's kind of given a raspberry to the front office. It almost seems like if he meant differently, his agent ought to have a talk with him about not using social media without adding clarity. If anybody who's ever tried to make a sarcastic remark in an email knows exactly what I'm talking about, by the way. It does not work, folks. Don't try it.
And it's worse on social media, right? Because it's then followed by a series of comments by people that also don't know what the heck you're talking about.
And they're all guessing about something different. Yeah. It's like, I don't know if we had a chance to talk about this, but J.J. Watt's comment about mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell. He just put that out. It was just a statement he put out. And then there are all these things that developed of the 7 degrees of separation between that being he's coming to the Ravens. And they're absolutely hilarious. I want to do a short on one of those, just have somebody, promote this as a conspiracy theory using the most, hardcore acting that he can to espouse theory. But the guy who did it on Reddit, worth taking a look at the thing because it's hilarious going through it, the connections.
It's going to be an interesting free agency year, I think. There's going to be a lot of waiting. And at the very end of the day, like, I want, DaCosta to know what he wants and go after it if that's what he wants, or just to wait it out, because the value that you're going to get by waiting and waiting and waiting, whoever's left, regardless of what you think of them as players, is going to have an immense amount of value, I think.
Yeah. And I agree. And from all what we're hearing, I think the Ravens are going to largely approach free agency that way. I don't think they'll have a big signing like most years. Like most years, all the people who are hitting F5 every 4 seconds during the first day of free agency are going to be disappointed and tweeting a lot. And we're going to have to, deal with every single wide receiver signing as being another one. What are you, asleep, Ravens? Kind of it. But it is what it is. And I agree with you. Always a pleasure to talk football, economics, whatever you like, Jordan, whenever we have you on the show. Tell people where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can check us out on Twitter at Raven Sit Room. I also do a podcast with an awesome co-host, Gabe Ferguson. He's at Gabe Fergie, and we do the Situation Room, which you can also find on Ken's site.
Now, we've heard, and I heard this from Gabe, who just was on one of the shows with me about, I think the outside linebacker position, yes, a few days ago, that you guys have not recorded a show in a while.
We haven't. We haven't been able to get our schedules together. So we're going to be doing a free agency primer here in the first couple of days, I think, as these things kind of roll out.
Okay. Sounds great, guys. I'm looking forward to it. And always a pleasure to have you on, Jordan. If you want to be on a film study short this offseason, I'm encouraging everybody who wants to do it. Just give me a focus topic. Send it to me by email, filmstudy21@verizon.net, or on my Twitter account, which you probably know is at filmstudyravens. Focus topic, 15, 20 minutes. That's what we're looking for. Just trying to get some interesting, passionate appeals from Ravens fans out there who'd like to do such a show. Thanks again, Jordan, for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Ken. I really appreciate it.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.